Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Gauri Divan, and I am the director of the Child Development Group at Sangat. Sangat is a not-for-profit. We work in the areas of child development, developmental disabilities, adolescent health, and mental health. And our main center is in Goa, but we also work across the country in various hubs, such as in Bhopal and New Delhi. So welcome to this webinar today, where I am going to be talking about supporting the mental well-being of parents and children during the pandemic. So what I hope to really talk about is first talk about our role as parents, the impact of COVID on mental health within families, so not only on us, but also what's happening with our children, and some key challenges and some possible approaches as parents. What can we do, and what is potentially some things that are going to help us really tide over this period? So generally speaking, when we talk about parenting, it's a real mix of words that come through in our minds. I think the overpowering word is always love and affection, but there's also patience, fun. It can be a tiring process. It can be rewarding. There are moments of anger, of sadness, but it's always balanced by the positivity of laughter, togetherness, and often multiple challenges. In all of this period of parenting, what has arrived in our lives is the COVID pandemic. And with that, things have changed. And things that have changed have really been anxieties around the illness for us as adults, and the impact of this pandemic and the lockdown on children too. So really, when we think about anxieties that the pandemic has generated, I think we need to think of two things. We need to think of our own anxieties and also our children's. And the reason I say our own anxiety is because I really feel that we can only be as good a parent as we are when we look after ourselves. So really, self-care is fundamental to us being good parents. And really, I would really like to spend some time talking about ways that we can manage ourselves and our own emotions. So the main emotion that is really striking most of us at this point is really anxiety. And anxiety emerges in many ways. It can be with difficulty in sleeping, in concentrating. It can be because we see in ourselves changing habits of sleeping and eating. So we may be sleeping too much. We may be sleeping too little. We may be waking up in the early hours of the morning. We may not be able to go to bed till very late in the night. We may be eating too much, or we may have lost our appetite. There is also an experience of extreme anxiety, which is called panic attacks. And this is really when we get these sudden onsets of palpitations, of our heart beating very fast, of perspiring, of breathlessness, of feeling very lightheaded. And these are part of the whole anxiety spectrum, and also important to recognize for what they are. Many of us as parents also have chronic health problems. So we may have things like diabetes, hypertension, and often these actually worsen when we are very anxious. And some of us may take to using certain substances which actually allow us and calm ourselves down. Often this is alcohol, this could be smoking, this could be other drugs. So this is really what anxiety does to us. And many of us are experiencing this actually with the pandemic. So what is really the critical process in handling anxiety? And the first thing I would really like to say is be kind to yourself. Look after yourself, because to be an effective and an engaged parent, you must be in full control both of your body as well as your mind. I think a very important first step in handling anxiety is to really think about what is making you anxious. And for each one of us, it's something different during these times. It's a very good idea to actually write these down and then maybe make a list. So prioritize them. What is the thing that makes me most anxious? What is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? It could be the virus. You could be worried about the health of a family member, especially if you are living in a household with the elderly, with grandparents. You may be living with somebody who is vulnerable, because one of the things we're hearing about is Coexisting problems make people more vulnerable to COVID. And so this is something that you could be worried about. You may be worried about your children. You may be having to work from home, because this is also the big shift that has happened, is that many of our workplaces have opened up, but they are actually pushing many of us to be working from home. And this is quite difficult, because suddenly you have to not only manage things that are happening in the house on a daily basis, but also you have the workload. You may be worried because as the city or the place that you work in opens up, you have to go back to work, and there are worries about actually going back to work. We are hearing about containment zones. We are hearing about the increasing numbers. And you might also just be worried about your future. So many of us are worried about our future because of the financial anxieties that suddenly we're all facing. So I think one of the real key areas about worries is to really, first of all, list them down, and then very clearly think about which are those that are in your control, which are things that you can do something about, and which are those that you have really no control over. So what are some key strategies around self-care? A very clear one that many of us actually may already be using in our day-to-day life to manage emotions is deep breathing and focused relaxation. It's also now being marketed as mindfulness. And there are multiple apps, and I would really urge some of you to kind of explore these, think about these, read about them. If some of you are doing yoga and pranayam, that's of course very much around deep breathing and relaxation. And so that's another form of mindfulness. Another key aspect of self-care is really setting up routines. And this includes mealtime, sleeping, and taking breaks. A very good way of focusing on the full day, particularly in these periods where you may be locked down, is to think about it as chunks of time. So what is the time you eat breakfast, you eat lunch, you maybe have a cup of tea, and you do dinner, and thinking about these as chunks of time so that they become reasonable amounts of times to manage. And within these periods, trying to set up clear routines. It's really very important to eat healthy. I think we're lucky now for most of us that we've been able to access food, but make sure that you are really minimizing junk food, because good food, good proteins actually gives us energy, but also junk food and high sugar levels actually makes our mind very, very unsettled. Exercise regularly. Now, this again is a challenge, since many of us may actually be locked down in a small space. But even within the context of a small space, there are ways to do stretching, there are ways to do aerobic exercises in a very small space. There are ways that we can actually think about putting yoga or stretching, standing, sitting, squatting within a daily routine. So do put these into your breaks and routines. I think we all need to make a very specific effort to minimize substance abuse and use. And this would be to really, if you are a smoker, from 20 cut down to 10. If you are having a drink a day, make it a drink every alternate day. So I think it's really important to understand why you are using these substances and how you can minimize their use. It's also very important to find a time to unwind and choose an activity that you enjoy. And I kind of think of this as me time. So what is it that you want to do particularly? Do you want to listen to some music? Do you want to actually listen to a TV program? Do you want to call up a friend and talk to them? Do you want to do a doodle? Do you want to scribble? Do you want to do some art? Do you actually want to read a book? So, you know, there's so many ways that we can enjoy ourselves. Do you want to pop your head out of your window and enjoy nature? Nature has suddenly taken has regenerated itself. Maybe you have a tree in your backyard or outside your window, which you might want to just spend some time observing. And lastly, make plans. Do remember, we are social human beings. We are also human beings that live for the future and for a better future. So let's not think that the pandemic is going to last forever. and actually start making plans for when the pandemic opens up. And it can be small things, going to meet people that you've been missing. It could be going to a favorite place. So start making plans for yourself and as a family. I think this is really a critical feeder of anxiety at this point in all our lives, is the university of WhatsApp and fake news that is going around, the incessant news cycles, and the shrill kind of news that we are receiving. There is absolutely and totally no need for us to be understanding every single day how many new cases of corona there are in our city or in our country or in the world. This is really something for scientists, for people who look after policy, who look after our health, to be worrying about. So step off these rumor mills. They are not very useful and they just add to our anxieties. So really minimize your time on the rumor mills and on the news cycle. So here is a nice little way of thinking about things that you can do for yourself. Remember, ask for help if you need to. Spend some time alone. Many of us may find this difficult because we live in crowded and busy households, but there can always be 15 or 20 minutes a day, either when you early morning when you wake up or just before going to bed, when you can really spend some time by yourself. Remember, it's important to put yourself first occasionally. So don't always, as a parent, particularly this is for the mothers out there, always be sacrificing your needs. Say and be insistent that, no, I do need this little time. I do need this space. I'm having a cup of tea now. I really want some peace and quiet. Ask for what you need. Set boundaries for yourself. Staying at home we are a little bit locked down, so maybe this is not the most appropriate, but maybe staying in a place in our home. Being clear enough to be able to say no, it's also very empowering. So you don't have to say yes to everything that your children and family members ask of you. And remember to forgive yourself for mistakes you make. We're all living in a very difficult time. And taking a step back from the busyness of life. So yeah, I'm thinking here of some solutions on self-care and on decreasing anxieties. So how do we think about, one of the clear messaging that we're getting is looking after ourselves and others. And I cannot insist more on very simple measures that we are being asked to keep. So please follow recommended practices. This is really important that you wear your mask. There is very good science backing up the fact that actually if you wear your mask, and if it is a clean mask, it actually prevents you inhaling the little droplets that actually are potentially carrying the virus from people who may be having a cough or maybe sneezing. So please follow the practice of wearing a mask. Also make sure that if it's a washable mask, that you are actually washing it regularly and ironing it regularly. So make sure that it's clean. Hand washing, of course, is another very important recommended practice. And thirdly, please make sure that if you are worried about a cough or illness, that you follow self-quarantine procedures. Do remember that these are all available on trusted government websites. I think one of the key issues at the moment that many of us are facing as parents is working from home. And the blurring of the boundaries between what is home and what is work, and the fact that many of us have young children at home. So I would say one of the very clear things is a very easy time is to be able to get up a little earlier and set up a couple of hours in the morning before our children wake up. Make everybody responsible for household tasks. Creating a work atmosphere and corner. And so particularly when we have young children, it's often difficult for young children to understand, I don't understand why my mama is not playing with me all the time because I'm at home. And so actually setting up a desk, having some visual messaging for younger kids, and it could be just a simple signboard which says, mama is busy, or a little red flag that you make, which then you put on your desk or your table, which actually indicates visually to your child that, okay, I shouldn't be making noise in this room. Discuss things with your child and get them to help protect time and space. So actually talking to your children to say, look, every day after you wake up, I will be helping you with your breakfast and I'll be sitting with you for breakfast. And after that, I need to go and work for a couple of hours. Teach them how to respond to these visual cues. Make sure also that there's protected time with your child. So it's very important that you're protecting work time, but it's also important that you protect time with your child. Also remember that many of these routines are going to change. Some schools are opening up, some schools are opening virtual classrooms. And so this is going to be changing over the next few weeks and months. So be flexible and learn to change these depending on the needs of that week particularly. I would also suggest that many of us have now started working on weekends because it's hard to tell what's a Monday and what's a Saturday and what's a Sunday. But I think it's important for our children to understand that there are some days in the week which are really protected, where you are there for them full time. I think it's also very important that some worries cannot be solved by you, particularly for many of us working parents. I think it's really important that our line managers, our employers all understand that as we work from home, we cannot be as productive as we were when we came to the office space. And so really important to admit this not only to yourself, but have an open discussion with your boss and your colleagues. Because there may be colleagues who don't have children who may be able to take up some of the complicated work that you are not able to do in a working week. I think it's also important to recognize other feelings that we may be having. We are social animals. And so it's really important for us to reach out and connect with others. Create a schedule or a rota where maybe once every day, if you have the time, you call out to and phone up a person that you're missing or you would have actually met. Talk to them about non-work issues. Choose who you want to be connected to. You will find that there are people who are continuously caught up in the news cycle, very negative about the world around them. You might want to say that, okay, I really don't come out very happy from when I speak to people like this. And really minimize contact with those kinds of people. Make a determined effort to talk about non-corona things. Watch positive movies and TV, on movies or TV shows that will actually not bring you down further. Some of us also have feelings of guilt and anger. Recognize them, find out why, and deal with them. So now I'd like to come to this area really of thinking about anxiety and what it's doing to our children. I think my audience is quite mixed. So I'm really going to try and talk across the ages around what we should be doing with all children. So I think the first thing really is to understand that we need to set up communication channels and we need to start communicating better with our children. And in some ways, I think the pandemic has given us a tremendous opportunity to open up these channels of communication, whatever the age of your child, and build on this into the future. So I think the first thing that we need to communicate is around the pandemic. Our children are getting information from multiple sources. And so it's really important to try and understand, first of all, what are the facts that you're going to give them? So we ourselves as parents needs to get the facts right. We then need to understand the language that our child is going to understand. So this is going to be different for a 5-year-old, for a 10-year-old, for a 12-year-old, for an 18-year-old in the house. You might also want to make these kind of scripts for the elderly in your household. So prepare a script, fix up a time when you're going to talk to your child. We are quite a few months into the pandemic. I think it's important to set this kind of conversation up with your child on a weekly basis, because as we all know, the information we are getting is changing every day. But I think that might be too frequent, but every week is a really good important time that we can sit down and think about, okay, this is what I've realized has happened this week. This is what potentially we're going to be doing going forwards. Before you sit down, find a time in the day when you are not distracted and neither is your child. Think about your child's character also. There are some children who worry a lot, and so you might use language which keeps them settled. There are some children who want to write things down, so you might with them want to write a diary or write down things in a book or on a piece of paper. For a very young child, you might want to use lots of pictures and stories to help them understand. Before you start, I cannot tell you the importance of switching off all devices, particularly that TV, which has often become a background instrument in our households. Turn our phones off or turn them over. Make sure you are attending to your child 100%. And also keep in mind that many of us as parents might have children of varying ages. It might also be important to think about ages and stages and really address children of different ages at different time points. The first step in this communication is really to find out what your child knows. As I said already, children have been listening to adults in the house. They're often walking through a room where the TV is on. Your older child might be reading the newspaper. Another might have a smartphone and picking up all kinds of information on social media. So it's really very important to understand what it is that your child knows. Good questions to ask is, what do you know about COVID? What have you understood of the pandemic? Where do you think we are today with the pandemic? What do you think is happening now? And how did you get this information? Remember, these are open-ended questions. They're not questions that are going to be judgmental. This is just a starting session to try and understand and find out what is the baseline information that your child has. It's also important to understand and ask your children, what are they worried about? And children may be worried about different things. They might be worried about the current situation. They may be worried about the fact that they cannot go to school and they're missing out on their friends. They may be worried about elderly people and their family. I think the older age groups are very worried at the moment about their futures. What's going to happen to my schooling? What's going to happen to my exam? If I don't, am I not able to do my exam? What kind of school am I going to get to? What kind of college? If I finish college, are there even any jobs? So I think across the ages and stages, we're going to have to think about how to reassure young people and really think about building their skills to manage these worries. So one of the ways after you have found out this information is to add to the information that your child has given you. Gently correct them if they have got something wrong. Be ready to be honest if you don't know the answers. Try to address their worries. And so if they're worried about a grandparent, maybe you can call up this grandparent on a regular basis. Similarly with school friends, your child may be in a virtual classroom, may be totally isolated from school friends. So try and get these connections going. Reassure them how you may be able to help them with setting up time for their schoolwork if that's started. Also, do not blame others. I think one of the things with social media and the current news cycles are that we are trying to blame people. XYZ has brought the infection. ABC is bringing the infection into my house. And this kind of blame game is going to get us nowhere. I think what we need to do is stop the stigma. Many of us are going to be COVID positive, if not already, in the future. We don't want people pointing fingers at us, and so we should not be pointing fingers at others. This is something that is happening. It's in our world now. We need to be empathetic, and we need to teach our young people that being empathetic, caring for people who are unwell, and supporting people who may be very isolated is more important than actually pointing fingers. And like I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to keep mentioning this, please limit your family's exposure to the news cycle, particularly to very shrill and very shrill news channels. Now let's really think about the various ages and stages. So young children very young children may not understand really what's going on, but they may understand the anxiety. And the anxiety you have might make them clingy. They might regress developmentally. So young children of say 3 and 4 and 5 who might have been toilet trained might start wetting themselves. They may start showing aggression or withdrawal or may have sleep problems. So be alert. These are signs of anxiety. Much of what we feel for very young children is often a sense of powerlessness. We are helpless. We're frustrated. We cannot help them. But a really good way of managing very young children is actually making sure that you tune into their anxieties, but you allow them to tune into your relaxation. So make sure that you're relaxed, make sure that you're mindful of what you are feeling in that moment. Make time for physical contact, hugging a child, holding a child, quiet time with a child. When you're reading a storybook to a child, holding them in your lap. Massage, skin to skin contact with very young babies is really important. And of course, I cannot stress the importance of fathers in all of this. I think for children who are slightly older, we need to acknowledge our children's worries. So say, I can understand that you're worried about what's going on. And often remember that children may not even be worried about the pandemic. They may be worried because, maybe a few months ago you had promised them something, that you were going to do something in June and now you can't do it, and that's what they're worried about. So really try and understand what is it that they're worried about. Create a time when you as a family can discuss worries and schedule it in. So particularly this is really very helpful because there are some children and young people who really worry a lot. And it might be very useful to kind of create a worry hour or a worry half an hour in the day. It could be half an hour before dinner or lunch, where you kind of say, okay, I can see that you're worried about X, Y, Z. Let's make sure we discuss it today in our worry hour. Within this worry hour, each one can bring their worries to the table. But remember that address the worries that you can do something about. There will be worries that are not in your control again, and you will have to admit this to your child. Remember, after a worrying time, it's always important to try and think of positive things also, maybe a conversation you had with a friend, maybe something funny that you saw on TV, maybe just a happy moment that you had, a happy memory. Try and end with a 4-minute deep breathing space, an exercise for the whole family, teaching young children a simple 4-minute, 4-count breath in and 4-count breath out is a really good way of calming and allowing them to learn these techniques. Be creative, make up songs, paint, play about vanquishing worries, allow children's imagination to take over. Remember that many of our kids have been stuck in the house for quite some time, and you're going to see challenging behaviors. It's really a time for you as a parent to role model how you manage your worries, but also how you manage your anger. So keep things positive, praise behaviors that you want to see, pause when you're very angry, use a calm voice, name the child that you are speaking to, be realistic. A really very good tip that I have learned is to actually start talking softer when your child is very agitated. What happens is that when we shout and scream, we are trying then, it's a match of who can shout louder. But actually, when you start talking softer, children suddenly realize they cannot hear you, and they will also calm down. Be a role model, manage your stress well, and show them practices like deep breathing and relaxation. Redirect behaviors. If you can see that a child is getting upset, is getting very anxious, give them a quiet corner where they learn to calm themselves. These are really very good ways that a child can build their own internal resilience. Set up consequences. Be very realistic about these, and don't blame the child, but tell them that these are the consequences we're setting up. If you don't do X, Y, Z, come to an agreement, and the next time the child doesn't do what you want them to do, tell them, actually, this is your choice. It sounds like you want the consequence. So as soon as this is over, you're going to have to do X, Y, Z, which is the consequence. Celebrate successes, however small. I think this is a really important time. I'm so happy that you picked up the clothes. I'm so happy that you're helping clear the table. And, bring out these successes, praise young children for all the little things that you want them to see, because finally we all work on positive strokes. There's a range of books. Unfortunately, all of the titles that I've shown you are in English, but there are some really good titles in local languages also. So please go out and find these resources. There's even a coloring book for Corona, but you can even make this yourself. You can make a storybook with your child about beating Corona. So there are really many ways that you can work with your young people in the house to try and creatively think of ways on handling their feelings, but also getting them to understand Corona and the impact of the pandemic. Young people, adolescents particularly, and when I say adolescents, I really mean 12 to 18 to 20-year-olds. These are a complex group, even at the best of times. But it still means that we have to set up communication, be open and frank, be firm about your role as a parent and your responsibilities to them. Some real worries of this age group are very unique. Many of these young people had really just achieved a sense of independence. They were going out on their own. They hadn't suddenly the flexibility of doing things. And this has suddenly been shrunk down. This freedom and opportunity has suddenly disappeared. They may be worried about their future. They may be worried about what we have done to their environments as the older generation. And there might be a sense of loneliness. So do pick up these, respect these worries, ask about them. Again, there may be some things you can do things about and some things that you can just quietly support. Don't pry, but inquire. Use language which is not intrusive. When I say convert complaints into actionable requests, what I mean is, don't say, oh, again, you've left your cup of tea there or your milk glass is on the dining table. Instead, you can say things like, it'll be great once you finish your milk if you put it away in the sink, if you put the glass away in the sink. So just try and change the language that we use into requests. Acknowledge again, as you will with all children, that you don't have all the answers. Suggest activities, and I like this ACE acronym, really things that young people can achieve, which are realistic, things that allow them to make a connection, and things that they enjoy. And what I mean by this is it's just possible phone calls to people that they're missing, things that they enjoy might be setting up, some way of physical activity and exercise within a household. How are you going to do it across the ages? This is really very important, not only for your self-care, but also for young people. It's absolutely important that young people get an hour of exercise every day. And this could be through the way of setting up areas and times in the day when children are free to exercise. I want to also, for us to be very clear about recognizing that within our households, there may be people at risk. And what do I mean by this? I mean that there may be people as well as adults who already had mental health problems before the pandemic. And so it's really important that we kind of keep an eye on these people and support them. There might already be people who have anxiety disorder in your household. You may have people with obsessive compulsive disorders. And this idea of hand washing now might have exacerbated it. You might have people who are already smoking, drinking, and these again might have ramped up. So try and think of how you are going to support these during the lockdown. Again, there's nothing like communicating, which is non-intrusive, which is open-ended. Try and minimize triggers, be patient. And the other thing is there are a lot of telepsychiatry services. Please use them. There are a number of them across the country, and it's really very important that we can reach out for them. Sometimes it might be just useful, particularly if it's an adolescent or an adult, to give them the phone, give them the number, and leave them alone. So don't nag them, don't force them to make the call, but actually say, look, this is a place that you could do, and I'm happy to help you, or I can just leave you to get on with this yourself. I think it's also very important, and one of the things that I would like to talk about now is living together during the lockdown. I think many of us are used to certain roles in our relationships, whether we are the wife, whether we are the husband. And this relationship has also been quite significantly strained during the lockdown period. And I think it's important for us, again, to be an effective parent. You need to look after yourself, but you also need to look after your relationship. So start conversations. If you think about division of labor, again, we are quite a few months down into the lockdown, but it's important if for both partners to realize that it's actually important. If one person is doing all the housework, how is it that they can help? Thinking about what is creating conflict. Talk about how each one of you is coping. Remember, there are many things that are actually worrying many of us as adults, particularly breadwinners in the family are currently very worried about financial futures for families. So do talk about these. Again, not everything has a solution, but just sharing it makes the problem, halves the problem in a way. Avoid letting adult conflicts interfere in your child's life when possible. This again is sometimes very difficult because many of us are living in very small spaces, but do keep this in mind. Do try and resolve these conflicts in a way and in a place which will not actually impact the young children in the house or the children in the house. Create positive family times. Whatever the conflict between you and your spouse or you and other adults in the household, do make sure that you are protecting time with the family. A really good thing to do, I feel, at this point is really to start telling stories about your life. It's a really wonderful time to start finding out and telling young people about the lives you lived as young people. What is your background? Where did you grow up? What was the world like when you were younger? Again, be kind to each other as adults and be flexible, because many of our roles are going to be changing in the next few years, and if not in the next few months. Do also remember that some of us are living in some difficult situations of domestic violence, emotional abuse, physical punishments, or viewing violence of people that we love. Again, there are multiple helplines around this, so I would really urge people to reach out to these, but also practice self-care, keeping in touch with people who can provide safety, avoiding triggering perpetrators, particularly when we don't have a choice and we're in lockdown, and finding ways in which one can reach out. And so if you have a neighbor who's in trouble, find out ways that we can reach out and support other people. Parenting in the time of COVID. I think we're really being asked now to do multiple and many things. So let me just briefly talk about this. Many of us thought that learning was going to be at home. Was not going to be at home, but was going to be in school. And we were very happy when we got our children into a good school, because we thought that was the end of that. And now suddenly with the lockdown, we're having to do lots of this work at home. Again, I really want to stress that remember to be very realistic. It's only at 7 and 8 when young people and young children will be able to sit for about up to 30 minutes. If your child is younger than that, please do not expect them to sit down for 1 and 2 hours and try and finish work. Really give small amounts of work, allow them to sit, finish a task, whether it's coloring in, whether it's cutting work, whether it's sticking work. Allow time for them to intersperse this with physical activity, to switch tasks and come back. Create structure with flexibility, customize it, collaborate with your young child. What do they want to start with? What do they want to end with? What would they like in their breaks, etc. Accept that you may not know. We might also be worried, some of us, because our children's schools have been closed for quite some time. We don't know what to teach them. A really good idea is to get children to teach you. Ask them, open up the math book and say, teach me what this is. And this really doesn't matter. Your level of literacy doesn't matter at all. Ask your child to teach you what they've learned. Consider formal and informal learning. Remember, if you can take a roti and you can teach fractions, you can cut up a roti into multiple parts, you can teach fractions, you can teach division, you can teach addition. So use moments within a day when you can really learn and you can teach children different things. And so in this way, make the home a learning rich in context. Another question that I think I've been getting as a pediatrician is how much screen time is okay. One of the things I'd like to say is we really don't know. But what we do know is it's not how much time children are spending on screen, but what they are doing on screen. So there is an active interaction with the screen and there's a passive interaction with the screen. What we do know is that particularly in very young children, passive screen time is really not very good. As children grow, active screen time, and what I mean by active is where there is a game or there's a learning process, or they're actually learning something through that process in the game, these are actually good things to do online for young children. I think it's particularly important, again, in social media. We've had lots of things that have been happening on social media and the misuse of social media. For us as parents to really talk about social media etiquette, particularly with our adolescent children. So discuss the idea of online bullying, of abuse, of risky behaviors. Understand the need, that there is a need for social connectedness, and when this is helpful and when this can be harmful. Many of our young people are often trapped into thinking that they have to be part of a social media group because everybody else is on it. Teach them that they can stand up for themselves if they're feeling uncomfortable and step out of such groups. There are multiple websites, again, that help us. UNICEF has a very good website and some good tips on keeping your children safe online during the pandemic. I'm going to end now to really say that we are social animals, like I said before. And I really want to change this idea of social distancing to physical distancing. We need to keep our social connections, particularly for ourselves and our children and our families. Keep those going, build on them, make them richer in this period, but make sure you keep your physical distance. Thank you very much.